Okay.
Okay. Welcome everyone to our next meeting for the SRO Exploratory Committee. I'll call the meeting to order now at 6:35. I hope you had a chance to review the minutes from the 5-4 meeting. And if so, can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Lisa, can I just ask one question first?
Sure.
I noticed a couple of areas were highlighted in yellow. Was there any?
Yes. So the first draft I sent to you, those portions were not included. So then I sent it out again and just highlighted so you would know that's what was different.
That's, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
When that goes, if it's public, will the highlight go away?
I did send that in to be posted and I removed the highlights.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa, can you hear me?
I can. Who's that?
It's Molly. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Is there a second?
John Polino, second, please.
Thank you. All in favor of approving those minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, those minutes are approved. And just to review our norms, we are welcoming and respecting all voices, and remembering that we are talking about people and systems, and those things are different, and listening to understand rather than to respond. And with that, unfortunately, we are missing a couple of our teachers and staff and administrators, but we did not get a chance last meeting to hear from them, as was on the agenda, as to their experiences related to the SRO program. So that's our first item of new business for tonight. I don't know if Roberta or Jen would like to go and share.
Sure. So I was able to speak with the elementary principals. I was speaking to those administrators. I believe Colleen was speaking to secondary. I know she's not here this evening, but I'll speak on behalf of the elementary principals. So there's 8 elementary principals. All EPs find the resource officers beneficial and would not want to lose their presence of the SROs during the school day. The perspective of the elementary principals is that SROs have been very helpful over the years. Their presence at schools is important from a safety perspective, in addition to building positive relationships with staff and students. Some examples that we wanted to highlight or share with the committee in regards to some of the responsibilities that the SROs have. They assist with safety drills. They assist with arrival and dismissal, greeting students and families in the morning and the afternoon, in addition to assisting with directing traffic. Some SROs serve as mentors to our students through the Hal Kaplan mentoring program. They visit classrooms to get to know the students and staff, and often they are the community members that come into kindergarten classrooms for their community helper unit. They'll eat lunch with the students, and you'll often find them outside at recess, whether that's playing a game of hoops or just hanging out with the kids, getting to know them more. They attend school events and family functions, and often they'll bring their own children to those events. They serve as the liaison between the school, police, and fire department. They're a standing member of our safety and security committee. They participate in discussions and efforts around safety, keeping our buildings keeping our buildings and grounds secure and safe. In the event that a school must call for emergency services, an SRO is typically the police officer that is sent out or to respond, because they're a familiar face to the students, to the staff, and to the administrator on duty. They've also supported schools when someone shouldn't have been on grounds or there was a suspicious vehicle. We're able to get in touch with that SRO fairly quickly, or they're just one school over and they can be on our grounds rather quickly, and they can help us. So that's personal experiences I've had with suspicious cars, or a van was stuck in the back trail of Moody, and we didn't know why it was there. And the SRO was on the grounds immediately to help us determine that this was not a threat to the school. Also, they'll help us with any questions in regards to custodial or court paperwork. Often, someone that comes in shows us something that we might be questioning, and they'll help us process through that paperwork as well. They've done wellness checks for us. So, for example, if a parent says their child came to school, but they haven't shown up, and what happens at the elementary level is if a child doesn't come to school, the school nurse calls home to verify that the child was sent to school. And we've had a couple instances where the parent says, oh yeah, they were on the bus, absolutely. But we can get in touch with that SRO. They go do the wellness check and the student's actually home. So it's a quick connection with that person that can help us in regards to wellness check or student safety when they're even outside of our school. And finally, I guess the most important thing is that the SROs have become a familiar face to parents and students and the staff, and they're really just considered a part of our school communities.
Thank you. Is it okay can I open the floor for questions?
Sure.
Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Kanata? And which school are you principal of?
I'm at Moody School. I was at Snow previously, but Moody now.
Diana?
I had a question about, in the case that, say for whatever reason, an SRO is not around, some of the things that you checked off, who would normally do? Bus drop work, legal liaison, wellness checks. Are those things that there's nobody at the school who would do that where they're not a police officer present?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. Are you asking me if the SRO wasn't at the school, who would do that job? So we would call the police department, we'd go through dispatch, they would call someone, and then they would send somebody out typically.
For some of the things like a wellness check, but what about bus loop duty?
Oh, so we have staff on duty, but sometimes if there's concerts or there's larger events, they're more suited at directing traffic. Otherwise, I would go out into the street. I've done that before in direct traffic. It's not where I'm best suited for. I can do it, but it is certainly helpful when there's an officer directing traffic or telling people you can't park there, or this is where you're going, so that I can actually be greeting families and within the school and starting the concert, not telling people they're illegally parked. So it would be me.
Yeah. So in a scenario, let's say where there's, a world where you had funding to hire behavior interventionists, folks from community who could help with traffic, directing traffic, a community liaison, someone who was a legal liaison who understood court cases, any of those positions, a number of positions could fill the role that these folks are filling at schools.
Some of them, I can't answer that question. I guess it would depend on the person. It would depend on their qualifications, but do I think I could hire a non-police officer to direct traffic? Yes. Do I think other people can be mentors? Yes.
Because other officers are not necessarily mentors unless they're SRO. Other officers are not
well, no, that's not necessarily true. I was just
they're volunteering,
describing,
not like paid mentors at our schools.
No, they're not paid mentors. None of them are. I'm just describing some of the roles that SROs are filling in our elementary schools. So some of them have become or built relationships with some students that they've actually become their mentor through the Kaplan Mentor Program.
If I could, I think this is one of those instances where we're talking about people versus systems.
Right, right.
And we recognize that the SROs that are currently in the buildings have done an excellent job of forming relationships. And I think what Diana is asking about is that the system of having officers doing some of these things, would it make sense for a different sort of system where like there's a social worker in the building doing some of these things?
Some of these things, yes, and some of them, no. So when, I'll give an example, when I had a homeless person sleeping on the grounds, had a tent in the back of the school, or when I had a homeless person living in the bread box, I think the SRO was best suited to address that type of situation, not a social worker. When we had the suspicious vehicle in the back of the school, where it should not have been, it actually went off an embankment and kids were scared. And I think an SRO is more suited for that too. I think, the mentoring, I think anyone can be a mentor, we're always looking for mentors. So to answer your question, I think some of the things that I mentioned could be done by other people, and some of them I would say no.
Yeah, but it's true that in other school districts, social workers, interventionists sometimes do wellness checks on parents, truancy check-ins
Yep.
on folks.
Yeah,
who don't
absolutely.
vote.
They do home visits.
And that
Absolutely.
maybe there might be some discomfort for families just having police pop up at their house uninvited, unannounced, and unasked for.
Well, with a wellness check, we let the parent know. So
Yeah.
we would say the child's not here. We're sending officer so-and-so out to make sure the child's not home. So it's not a sneak attack or anything like that. It's something that we discuss with the parent for a wellness check, because we're calling them to say, you said you sent your child to school, but they're not here. So there's a concern. So that's a dialogue that we have with the parent. And we would let them know that an officer was going out to do a wellness check.
Okay. And you said this was a compilation of things that you collected from all the principals, not just your own
Correct.
experiences.
Yep, correct. This is
Thank
from
you.
all 8 elementary principals.
Thank you. Any other questions from the principal, for the principal perspective? Okay, thank you. And can I turn the floor then over to, oh wait, I see, oh, Justin has something in the chat. The suspense.
I feel like it must be long, Lisa. It's not showing up yet.
Can we talk about the intersection of SRO and discipline?
Sure.
Yeah. So
Are you,
go ahead,
go
Jen.
ahead. No, you go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
So just to clarify, like what role did the teachers and administrators play in discipline versus the role that the SROs play? I think.
Right. So that's what I thought he was asking as well, Lisa. So the administrators handle the discipline. So if we have an incident where, there's an altercation or a student makes, a poor decision at school, all discipline at the elementary level is handled by the building administrator.
Okay, thank you. No problem, Justin. Okay, I see, thanks. So I think that's good. Molly, I see your hand.
Yep. Can everybody hear me okay? I don't know. Okay. So you had said about interactions with SROs. Justin raised a question in discipline. Can you tell me a little bit more about the interaction of SROs and children who might be having a mental health crisis? Because I don't see that the same as discipline. What's their role when there's a child who is having a mental health crisis?
So I can't personally speak to that because I have not used an SRO for an instance like that. I would call 211. So I can't answer that personally. I can surmise as to what they might
if
do.
This is a known child to you and they're known to your special education team, are there not systems in place or whether it's a school psychologist, social worker, BCBA, or someone to assist in a situation like that? Or
Sure.
would you just go to 211?
So we have a crisis team. So each school has a crisis team. And that can consist of, various people between the school psychologist, the social worker, the nurse, the administrator, depending what staff you have in your building. Some schools have BCBAs or BTs, behavior techs. Some schools don't. So the makeup of your crisis team depends on the staff that you have. So when a student is in crisis, that's your first response, is to get your crisis team together to assess the situation and the level of safety or care that's needed. If the team can't address that level of care and the team decides that either the student's in crisis too long or the level of care is getting too high for the team on the campus, then you would reach out to 211. If the level of care was beyond 211, you would have to consider if you were going to call 911. There could be, so I have heard some principals say, if the SRO is in the building and they're a familiar face to that student and they have a relationship, they might join that crisis team to assist. I personally have not had that experience when I was at Snow or at Moody, but the typical protocol is your immediate crisis team, 211, and then 911 if needed.
Can I follow up? You mentioned there's different staffing. So a school might have a school psychologist or a social worker. What's the staffing in your school?
Moody School. So Moody School, all schools have a school psychologist and social worker. It just depends whether they're full-time or part-time. And then some schools have BCBAs or BTs, which are behavior experts. And that depends if you have an intensive case management program. So Moody School has 2 intensive case management classrooms, and those are students that need a higher level of care. And so we do have a BT and a BCBA for those rooms. I'm thinking when I worked at Snow School for the preschool, we also had a full-time social worker for just preschool. So the identified staff that you have in your building really depends on the number of students or what type of programming you have.
And Lisa, just one more question to follow up.
Sure.
Every day, even if the position's part-time or not, there should be at least one mental health professional on your campus every day.
That's correct. So
Okay.
Most schools have, I'll give Moody as an example. We have a full-time school psychologist. We have a part-time social worker. It might be flipped around for another school. It might be that they have a full-time social worker and a part-time school psychologist. And then each school, I want to say all 8 elementary schools. I can't remember if the last one just onboarded in January, but we have MSELI. So we have the Middletown Social Emotional Learning interventionists. So on top of your full-time psychologist, your part-time social worker, you do have your MSELI interventionist who also assists for even lower level. They're helping to do groups on social emotional learning, how to identify emotions, how to address an emotion, what emotion are you feeling? It's okay to feel emotions, and you use the mood meter, you talk about meta moments. So that program is also in the elementary schools.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think now we are ready for Ms. Downer.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So Colleen couldn't be here this evening due to a conflicting appointment, and I would not try to speak on her behalf, but from a teacher's perspective, the current SROs we have, we're finding that they are very approachable. They're visible at all times. The students and the teachers see them in the building in the early morning. They're always around at lunch. They're always around at dismissal. Sros is currently coaching our baseball team, or an assistant coach on the baseball team. And Officer Willard does a lot of work in the community with the parents. And we see that quite visible because the interactions that they have with the kids at school, you see the ease with which the kids interact with them. What we find is that our students currently, the ease and the coolness of the interactions that they have with the SROs, they're more open. They oftentimes bring concerns to them. And this is coming from my talking to both some of our students and the SROs, and confirming that, the students are quite comfortable interacting with them, mainly because not only do they see them visibly in the hallways, but they also interact in our classrooms. We have courses in forensics, we have courses in civics. They don't teach the entire class, but they, show up, or they come when you invite them, whether to give a mini lecture or to do a co-taught activity with them. And so they're very flexible, both with the teachers and the students with their interactions. And the fact that we are comfortable and have a very, should I say, laid back or friendly interaction with them is helpful. We've had some issues recently spill over from the community, and they were present. They helped us to make that first day back feel more comfortable. There were other measures in place, and I would prefer if Colleen spoke to that. But just having those familiar faces amongst the other faces that we had present in the first 2 days back to school was helpful. So I think a lot of what Ms. Kanata spoke about earlier this evening too, we have, but I think Colleen is more, should I say, in the know about the details.
Yeah,
But-
I'm definitely not expecting you to speak from her, just from your perspective as a teacher.
Yes.
Anyone have any questions for Roberta? I saw Diana's hand first and then Molly.
Thank you, Roberta. I wonder if you could speak to whether, as an official teacher, you have been officially questioned or polled or surveyed in any official capacity, anonymously or not, about your experiences with SROs, as like something that came from the district or something that came from the Board of Ed.
No.
So I heard all of your experiences, and I don't ever want to invalidate them, but I wonder perhaps if there are folks who don't share those, or who have more conflicted experiences, that might be worried about sharing them, considering all 8 principals of all the leaders of the schools are very much in support of the program and the structure as is. And I don't expect you to answer that, but I just want to, just say out there that there might be perhaps, maybe not teachers, but perhaps paras, folks who work at our schools who have different experiences, or who have different experiences with kids who have experienced SROs, who maybe don't want to say anything to ruffle any feathers.
I would say that may be true in every environment, but you are correct when you say I wouldn't be able to speak about it.
And there's not been any official process that's built into this SRO contract that requires some reporting around polling folks, surveying folks officially, unofficially, anonymously, non-anonymously around their experiences with those programs.
Correct.
Molly?
This is a question for Ms. Downer. One thing we haven't seen yet in all of the materials is some sort of training guide for teachers or administrators. And so my question is, as a teacher, if you felt in the moment that you needed an SRO, would you know how to get in touch with them or what to do? And how would you determine that you would like an SRO to perhaps come to your classroom, or you would maybe instead want a mental health professional to come to your classroom because there was a situation you felt like you couldn't control?
So when we have situations that we can't control, we dial 4,000. That notifies an emergency team in the building that would respond. It includes administrators. And as far as I know, the SROs come as well. But we don't get to make that decision. Once the situation escalates out of our control, we dial 4,000. Beyond that, our administration and their team takes over.
All right.
And sorry,
Oh,
when
sorry,
we
go
dial
ahead.
4,000, I'm sorry. We're not required to say anything. We can just dial the 4,000 and leave the phone off the hook, and they will still respond. It's that's the call button for us.
Thank you for that. Yes, Sergeant Porter.
Unmute myself there. Generally speaking, when you push the 4,000 button at the high school, you're going to get the staff response first, the CSOs, the campus security officers. And yes, on occasion, the SROs may be behind them, but the first action is with the CSOs.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right.
Lisa, can I ask one last follow-up question?
Sure.
So Sergeant Porter, do you provide during teacher orientation or training any kind of overview of the program or talk about safety with the teaching staff?
Yes, we've come in pre-COVID to have the discussion about what surrounds our emergency drills, actions we want the teachers to take, staff members and whatnot. In the last year, we haven't been doing them. Ray Byron usually reaches out to us from the high school and says, hey, Bill, can you and your team come in on a certain day and kind of discuss emergency actions and what to expect during a drill or an emergency situation. Does that answer the question? I mean, okay.
Yeah, I see Justin had a follow-up question in the chat that was more related to the question right before. How do we define out of control situations? What behavioral situations reach that level?
Is that a question for me?
I think so.
Okay. So Justin, I can't say that I have an official definition of what is an out of control situation. I think that depends on the teacher and their perspective of what's going on in the classroom. I know for myself, I've had to call 4,000 when I've felt like students were on the verge of getting into a fight that I couldn't stop from happening. I've heard about other types of situations where the kids may have, had arguments or disagreements in the room, and the teachers just felt like they couldn't control the situation. I can't say that I know of any mental health related disturbances we've had, even though we may have had them. But yeah, so, it's usually when the teacher feels like they can't control whatever escalation they have going on in their room at the time. and it's solely on the perspective of the teacher.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, Ms. Kanata, Ms. Downer, I really appreciate you sharing and taking questions. I think that covers that agenda item, and we can move on to the next agenda item, which I resent a couple of documents that I had shared before that we didn't get a chance to talk about, and sent a couple of new ones. And so the common thread this time around with these documents is quantitative. Well, actually, there's some qualitative data as well, but data. And I would like us to have a discussion around these documents. And I think it is helpful to start with, let me see. Mike, can you allow me to share my screen? And we'll take a look first at the document called Ctsro 2018. So I figured we would start with this just to provide some larger statewide context for Middletown's SRO program. Although I will note that this is from 2018. This is the most recent legislative report that I could access. But if we take a look at Middletown, we can see that back then we only had 2 SROs. So this is not reflective of where we are currently, and I'm not sure what other districts have changed and whether their numbers have gone up or down. But this gives you some sense of what other districts have SROs, how many they have, in which schools they have SROs, and what the funding is for that. And I'm wondering, I'd like to open up the floor if there are any things that you notice that stand out to you about this. Sergeant Porter?
I'd just like to say that, the cost is somewhere far north of $100,000. Not sure where they got their figures from, but we give up an SRO that's a full-time police officer to the school for 180 days a year. We're far north of 100,000. So that figure is not accurate, even for 2 SROs. So now multiply that by 6. I think you're in the area somewhere of 500,000 or slightly north of that.
Okay. Thank you for that. Diana?
I was also going to note the discrepancy in the price range. According to what I was able to find from the city budget, officers currently make about $82,000 a year before overtime. 6 officers before overtime puts us at $552,000 just in salary, not including the cost of benefits. And that was the one thing. One of the documents we didn't get to last time was the program overview that detailed. It didn't say how much the city pays for the SRO program, but it did note that it was funded through the MPD budget, not through BOE. And I thought that was an interesting thing to want to note in the future, the cost of that money in terms, and as I'm thinking about them speaking from a me perspective, of how many behavior interventionists, social workers, et cetera, psychologists, et cetera, we could fund for the cost of $552,000 annually. Although I know not all of that money goes towards the schools because they're only there 180 days. So I don't know how to do the math on how many days that is. So.
Related to funding, Sergeant Porter, is any of that money coming from grants that the police department receives? Or is that part of the operating budget?
That's part of the operating budget for the police department. And then what to consider is if you were to remove, going back to Diana's point, if you were to remove the SROs, the city is still going to pay for those officers because they're police officers. They'll be assigned to the street. And then you'll pay an additional cost out of the BOE budget for interventionists and whatnot.
Thank you. Other noticings, comments from this document?
I would only add that, as we already know, there is no consistency across the state in terms of who funds this kind of work, what the costs are, what the accurate, like what an appropriate number of SROs is per school district by size. There's no consistency across the board at all. And so it's kind of hard to look at something like this and think about where we could or should be, because there's literally no common threads.
Yeah, I think that's what stood out for me. It's interesting to see which communities have SROs, which communities don't have SROs. It does look like most of the time SROs are stationed in middle schools and high schools, not so much in elementary schools. But yeah, there's New Haven that has, according to at this time, 12. And obviously that you can think about district size and things like that, but a district that would be comparable to New Haven, I guess, would be Hartford, and Hartford doesn't have SROs. So
the other thing that's absent here is a conversation about school security officers, because Hartford Public Schools, as I understand, don't have officers, but they do have security personnel. We have both. And so it's hard also to determine how many of these districts also have other forms of school enforcement, and what does that look like comparably. So it feels like there's just, for me, a lot of stuff, info that's missing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if there was also a job description or what duties that the security officers do, campus security officers do.
Lisa, I would want to know, and I don't think anybody here has been here doing this long enough, when the initial SRO program rolled out, was there grants in state or federal funding for the program, and that no longer exists, and now it's on the districts or the local police departments to cover these costs?
Sergeant Porter, do you know that?
I believe you're correct, Molly. I believe that there was grants initially. I don't know for a fact if Middletown had taken advantage of that, because it's always seemed to be someone assigned from our family services unit, which is special investigations unit. So maybe, but I'm going to lean towards no for Middletown. Other communities definitely had grants available to them.
All right, if we are good with this document, then we'll move on to school-based arrests. Middletown, just to clarify, Middletown shows up on each of these reports. So each page is a different school year. It goes back to September 2011. Middletown shows up on each page in this upper left-hand box, but that's because of because we've got a court here. The only time that Middletown shows up on this document as far as for its number of arrests is on this first page in 2011, where it was in the top 10 of schools as far as the highest arrest rates. So you see that there. But, and I think Justin had referred to that in a previous meeting, that about 10 years ago, the arrest rate in Middletown was significantly higher than other high schools at similar sizes. But it has gone down. And after that year, it does not appear on this list anymore. And I don't know if anyone else had any other observations or questions from this document.
If I can speak up, Lisa.
Sure.
The report doesn't reference Vinyl Tech. And Justin can jump in, kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but for many years, Vinyl Tech also hurt us in our numbers, because they would have school-based arrests that would count against Middletown High School, where we didn't have a police officer. It was a state trooper coming into Vinyl. Did Justin respond to that?
I saw something in the chat.
The other interesting thing to think about with these reports is that in many of these cases, sometimes it's the same kid getting arrested over and over again. So it doesn't count towards a bunch of different kids being arrested. It's the same youth that had different issues, was arrested for different things. I can tell you during my tenure with Special Investigations and our current group of SROs, we team the responses when it comes to an arrest. And you'll see that as we get into some of the actual Middletown cases. That'll come up in some documents you're going to present shortly.
Thank you. So I'm confused. Justin said the issue with some of these numbers is it's for any Middletown resident. I don't understand that, as this is a report that's called school-based arrests.
Correct.
Can you clarify?
So what happens, and Justin, jump in if
yeah, I have a quick minute, but so it's any Middletown resident who gets arrested at school.
correct. Could be
What doesn't matter that their school's in Middletown or not, because the court is all based on residency and not place of arrest for juveniles, for youth.
Correct.
So like, a young person could be arrested in Manchester, but they have to appear where they live, which is Middletown. So the clunkiness of the court-based reporting is that Middletown shows up as any Middletown resident. So that for a teenager or a high school student, that could include Vinyl. For middle school students, it could include Thomas Edison. I've seen them also report in behavioral schools, if there was a Middletown young person at a behavioral school. And conversely, it could work that if one of our Vinyl students lived out of the court district and was arrested in Middletown High, but resides in, I'm making this up, Wallingford, which would be outside of our court district. So it's generally accurate, but I think it's not completely.
Okay, thank you for that. This is a common European. Any other noticings, questions, comments around this document? Sorry, we're swatting flies over here.
I was just gonna add that the same way the other documents don't show. I guess what I'm interested in knowing is what behavior trends look like. So like if the program's been operating since 2001, and at the point of 2011 we made top 10, right? Awful. At this point, does this mean that this doesn't include kids who are, does this include kids who are sent to the diversion program? Does this include kids who are, who don't rise to the level of like an arrest, but are still having behavior that could ultimately result in an arrest someday? So I guess I'm just interested in like behavior data and not just arrest data. And I think this doesn't, after the first page, it doesn't tell me anything. So like, we could have gone from 0 arrests to 5, and that's a big increase, right? But it didn't make the list of top 10. So I know we have other data points that show that, but I'm thinking much more about like what's happening in the ground at schools. Are there kids who are like, how is diversion working, and how is like intervention? What does that look like in terms of like how many kids could have had behavior issues, or how many kids are like at this point where they've been in school suspended a few times, et cetera, et cetera. Like those are the things that I think I'm looking for myself.
Justin commented, yes, the other issue in the data is that it's impossible to disaggregate whether the arrest is for, quote, wearing a hat in school or for bringing in a weapon. It's quantity, not quality. It doesn't speak to diversion referrals. These are just the ones that go to court.
I would hope that no one's getting arrested for wearing a hat in school. The behavioral things are dealt with by staff members, and they don't rise to the level of an arrest. So I think that's very important to note. And the discrepancy in this document is that, a lot of schools contribute to that number, not just Middletown High School, as they've noted there. It's Vinyl Tech, that's Thomas Edison. It could be the Wheeler Clinic, as Justin mentioned, some other program. So I don't give this document a lot of credence, but it is what it is. It is some data reporting somebody tried to figure out. But as Justin put it, the clunkiness of the system, because if you're arrested in Meriden and you're a juvenile, you're going to the Middletown court because you're a Middletown resident. That's the way it's sort of calculated out. Hope that answers the question. Does it, Diana?
Yeah, I think it does, but as Justin noted, it also doesn't include kids who have had the experience of arrest at school, but went through a diversion program that didn't go through the courts. And so those kids still have had the experience of an arrest in front of their peers, or in a space that's like a school learning space. And that's not reflected here either. And this also doesn't break down, it breaks down the first day by race. I'm also very interested in looking at other data by race, and we don't have that after 2011. So
yeah. So a data point, but somewhat misleading and difficult to work with data point. I think after the law that was passed in 2015 that Mr. Hart referenced at our last meeting, I think there has been some attempt to change how data is collected and reported. So beginning in 2015, all of us can go to edsite.ct.gov and see a whole bunch of data on our schools. And so beginning in the 2015-2016 school year, on what are called profile and performance reports, you were able to then see the number of school-based arrests. And so I went through those reports for the district as a whole. And that's where this second column of information came from. And then to try to figure out what schools those arrests were in, I went through each of the reports for each of the different schools. So I believe it's for student privacy. If the number is really low, they don't report it. So the lowest, if there are 0, they put 0. But if there is a number between 1 and 6, they just put fewer than 6. So for like the 2017-2018 school year, the district report said there were 9 arrests. The Middletown High School report said there were 7 arrests there, and none of the other schools reported any arrests. They all reported 0. So I'm not sure why there is a discrepancy in 2017, 2018, and similarly with 2016, 2017. This data is self-reported by the district to the state, and the state just puts out what is reported to them. But this is the most recent data I was able to access. So Diana's got a question about this. Could this include vinyl? Sergeant Porter says, yes, it can. So maybe that's where those missing numbers are from.
Lisa, I had a question.
Yeah.
About I think we heard on our last call that the administrators are using PowerSchool to track this sort of data. Does the district have the capability to get reporting from PowerSchool that would give us a clearer picture of what we'd like to see? Is that possible?
I'll ask Jennifer.
Without revealing names, but just,
Sure things,
you know.
yeah, Molly, I'm sure things could be redacted. Again, I've never had to use PowerSchool because I haven't been involved with arrests at the elementary level. So I'm assuming with secondary, everything does go into PowerSchool, so that I would think yes is the answer. But because I've never personally had to enter that in there, I could be wrong, but I would say yes.
Other questions, comments, concerns related to this document?
Does Justin use PowerSchool? I'm wondering when he's looking at information or data. I'm just curious who, besides the school, who touches PowerSchool? Not the police department, but does anybody else?
I don't know if Justin's available. He's putting to bed his little ones. I think I remember Cheryl or Colleen saying that it was the administrators who would enter what if a student went to the diversion program or whatever happened, that it was the administrators who entered that. I don't think Justin enters.
Correct. So there's a lot of different values you can enter, Molly. So if a student's suspended, you have to, check off the suspension block. You have to write a little note as to why or how many days, is it an in school and out of school? I know there is an arrest section in PowerSchool. So I know those values are in there. So I do believe it would be able to be accessed through PowerSchool. And to your point, Dr. Loomis, it is the administration that completes that information and has it entered into PowerSchool.
So I stopped sharing because the next document I was hoping we could discuss was the school-based referrals document. And I know Sergeant Porter was very clear with me that this is not to be shared publicly. So Sergeant Porter, can you, are we able to discuss, like, what level of discussion can we have around this document?
The issue around this document is that these are actual cases here in Middletown. And identities may be revealed just by the nature of talking about the case. I could certainly, go into executive session. We could all talk about this in real time. However, because some of these cases were referred to JRB, the student or, the actor, if you will, may have successfully completed that program. And because he completed or she completed the program, the arrest was expunged. And so it no longer exists. And that may also correlate with the document that you just had up, where some referrals show up here, and yet they didn't show up in your data collection there. If someone successfully completes that JRB program, it's the record is expunged. Usually, Justin will send that data to us to say, so-and-so completed the program, the record's expunged, or I'll hear something from Michelangelo Palmieri, who is the juvenile probation officer for Middletown and Meriden. Does that sort of answer?
Yes. So just to put the public at ease, there are no student names on this document that the committee has, but just by nature of the description of the event is a way that some students could be identified. So let's not discuss those sorts of details. Let's just say if people have questions or comments about how this data is collected, formatted, reported, let's sort of look at the system of the data collection and see if there are any questions or comments or concerns around that.
Doc, if I may, just before we get started, this rundown, if everyone has it in front of them, is similar to what's provided to Justin's group for the Youth Services Bureau, or where I sit as well. This way, he has a rundown of all juvenile arrests, not just school-based arrests. And these are just school-based. There's other arrests that occur on the street, weekly, that also get reported. And among school-based arrests, when we provide them to the Youth Services Bureau, we also report what school, the grade, the age, gender, and race. So it's all included with the report to the Youth Services Bureau. And certainly that's something that we can discuss as we move forward with a new memorandum, or something that we can report to the schools as well.
I see Diana's hand.
Yeah, I know we can't talk about the specifics, but we can talk generally about the numbers, right? So I'm counting, if I count up, because the document doesn't count for me, 26 referrals, 2018, 2019, and 10 the year after. And do you keep a breakdown of demographics on these kids in terms of age, school year, race, gender?
I had just mentioned that. That's something we do keep track of.
But not in this document here.
No, I did not.
And I noticed a lot of the issues seem to start with physical altercations. And maybe that's not a question for Sergeant Porter, but what is a teacher's role in either witnessing a physical altercation, like what are they allowed to do, what aren't they allowed to do in terms of intervening? And then what kinds of interventions are in place in general around restorative practice, mediation, or figuring out conflict between students before they get to so that they don't get to the point of punching each other in the face.
Am I up to that one?
I don't know who is.
Yeah, I think it's more appropriate to have like the high school principal here for that. But I will tell you that in the right response plan, which we've followed for many, many years, staff members attempt to intervene first. In the cases of the high school and the middle school, you also have the campus security officers will intervene first. If it rises to the level where it gets beyond the control of the staff members and the campus security officers, or they become injured as a result of if we're going to use assault as the example, yeah, the SROs are going to step in and restore order.
Yeah, that's correct, Sergeant Porter. And then to answer Deanna's question about restorative circles or restorative practices, we do have, I'll speak for the elementary level, we do have restorative coaches in the building who will work with students after, or a student that's harmed. And that doesn't necessarily mean physically, that could be harmed by words or physical actions. So we do have that in place in the elementary schools as well. We've had some training on that.
And to Jen's point, Ray Byron at the high school also does the restorative circles. I know of a few that he's called me on. He said, "Do you think this will work?" And I agree with him. It does in some cases.
So you have mediation that happens before things escalate. So I understand restorative things are for restoring things after they've been broken. I mean, is there a place where at the high school or anywhere else where students can go and say, I'm having a conflict with this person, I want to resolve it before we get to the point of getting physical? Or how does that happen? I've heard a number of times that students are approaching the SROs and saying this person might be arguing, these people might be fighting. Is there a process in place when they hear that then triggers a response that says, okay, now you have to go talk to this social worker and hopefully work your issues out, or this person who's trained at the school to talk about mediation and work it out so that it doesn't get to the point of a physical altercation?
So may I, as a teacher, when our students start to speak to us about things like that, we have peer mediation as well as adult supervised mediation that students can get involved with to resolve some of these actions beforehand. Oftentimes we as teachers will refer a student to their guidance counselor or their case manager if we deem the situation necessary. I mean, as referring to calling 4,000 is for when you've exhausted your options and that situation just seems like it's just totally out of your hands as an emergency. But yes, there are a few degrees of options that we have before we get to the point of calling administration or calling for an SRO. And as teachers, we more call for administration or for guidance before we don't necessarily call the SROs to our rooms like that.
All right, I see Molly's hand.
Looking at the document, I noticed a pattern in both years that you shared. I see the months of January, February, and March for both years had the most amount of referrals. Sergeant Porter, do you want to talk about what is being done or what can be done in these months where the kids are stuck inside more? So I definitely see a pattern here. I don't know if you want to go back in time and look at other years, but I suspect that. And I also would be wondering about time, because you don't mention time on any of the incidents. Are they happening in the morning? Are they happening at the end of the day or middle of the day?
I don't believe the time really, it varies so often, Molly, that it's difficult to hone down on any time. So time really wasn't an issue, but I will tell you that you're correct in that the months, I think the kids come into school and they get comfortable after a while, and maybe there's the cooped up for winter and whatnot. There's a lot of factors, and we would have to study that. But in all these cases, I can tell you that it was a collaborative decision between the SROs and the principals. If you look at all of them, it involved an injury. Injury to faculty members, damage to property at the school or another person, biohazard incidents where someone, had to go and get tested because of something that had happened. Without getting into details, I'm chomping at the bit to tell you about some of these cases, but I know I can't do it here. In some of these cases that were referrals, after the person that was referred was taken out of the atmosphere where let's call it a fight, if it was a fight that resulted in injuries, calmed down, we were able to say, okay, you know what, this can go over to the juvenile review board versus going down to court. And we could make those decisions together as well. I hope that somewhat answers the questions, but as far as the months, yeah, there is definitely a pattern.
Principal Kanata, do you also see an uptick in behavioral issues in the winter months?
I can't respond to that, but I don't, at Moody School, we really have very few behaviors. So
I can
would,
vouch for that.
I would say, no, I do not see an uptick. And especially this year, we didn't have a traditional school year at all. So for the 2 years that I've been at Moody, we went out on March 13th on COVID. And then when we came back this year, we were in the hybrid model. So we had, a maximum of 10 or 11 kids in a classroom. We saw almost no behaviors. Having that smaller class size limited to no behavior issues. I would agree, though, that it is harder for students in the winter months, as recess can be indoors depending on the weather. So PE is inside often due to the grounds being snowy or icy. So yes, it would make sense, or one would believe that there would be an uptick in some of those behaviors due to the minimal amount of activity or access to outside.
Roger?
I was just wondering if Sergeant Porter or maybe Justin could speak to the effectiveness of the Juvenile Review Board, because I did notice the SROs tend to want to get the JRB involved, and there's only a few of those instances where the juveniles were actually referred to juvenile court, and in certain instances is because they had already been through the JRB. So I guess to circle back around, I'm just like, the effectiveness of the JRB, is it working?
I believe it is, but I would defer to Justin on that. I hope he can join in. I can tell you, Roger, that there's a few cases where the matter was egregious, if you will, enough so that it did have to go to court, and it couldn't be deferred to the JRB process. Here's Justin now.
Justin, did you get to hear that question? Oh,
I'm just coming back now.
So Roger's question was, how effective, do you have a sense of how effective the JRB is? He noticed that there were a number of referrals to the JRB.
Yeah, so to define effective, right? And so, I think we, in terms of handling a situation in isolation, I would say, particularly in the iteration of our work over the last 8 years that has been restorative in nature, our ability to keep young people from having to go to court to handle these situations and stay in community to do that is very high, probably in the 90s percent of avoiding court referral, while also kind of redefining accountability, to be about relational harm as opposed to kind of just rule and law broken. In terms of keeping young people from being rearrested, That is where, I can't claim that we are in the 90%. I think young people in their journey through struggle might very well find themselves in another situation where, their inability to respond to the expectations in the moment, or their ability to solve a problem in the moment, leads to another arrest. We will often try to advocate for them to return to our process, because we just always feel like they're better off with us than they are in the court system. I will also say that this is offering you kind of anecdotal, my biased lens, but we are undergoing a study on kind of recidivism, one of the first kind of diversion processes in the state to try to access this information from the court system to track that along with maybe some other key indicators. But I think we're fairly, in terms of responding to the initial harm caused. I do think we do a pretty successful job of that, and we send very few, if any, young people to court.
Thank you for that.
I will also say that I know we did reference some ability of schools to hold restorative space as a response to behavioral issues, and I think that is true, and sometimes schools will also call our staff to respond to situations, but that process is far from systemic. And doesn't happen kind of universally. And so I think that's one place where I would push our schools to kind of implement that more wider and through design and intention than kind of like we have a good relationship with an administrator, which we hope we have relationships with everyone. But some folks know to use us more than others, and or have those internal skills more than others. And also that this work is about the journey. So, we did years back make, through some grants, make very intentional efforts to train folks in restorative work and holding space in this way. But it's a journey, and you get better, and you get to a certain point where you then question everything you're doing because you understand it at a deeper level. And we've reiterated and reimagined our process several times over in the last 8 years. And that if we have a school district that it's going to work to be restorative, I think that's we're going to have to all follow a similar process.
Thank you for that. So there was a link that I shared to one other document, which is a report from Connecticut Voices for Children. That is the latest research that I could find on Connecticut SROs, and I'm trying to find it now. But I would just like to clarify, I sent that out because this data that was shared with us was not, didn't have race included. So Sergeant Porter, if that can be shared with us, I would like to see that. One of the major findings from that study from Connecticut Voices for Children was that Latino students were 6 times more likely to be arrested. So that's obviously troubling. And they also compared behaviors and academic achievement in schools with SROs to schools without SROs, and they didn't see, there weren't significant differences. And so their conclusions were that the SROs were not having a large impact on improving school safety or academic success. So I don't know if anyone had a chance at that and had any questions or comments about that. Diana?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that, and I went to a few presentations on this data that were hosted by CT Voices, and they also noted some of the same difficulties that we did in collecting data and getting consistent data, and in analyzing data across all the municipalities that used a million different types of communicate or connections with SROs. There was not again, they could not find a consistent trend or thread around how this happens at a statewide level, much less on a municipal level. And I think I'm not 100% sure what years they were looking at when they were looking at this data, but I don't know how super current it was considering what was available to them. So partly I noticed that they used that 15-16 year where we had very few arrests, I think that school year. And even with few arrests, overall, our numbers were skewed racially. Our numbers are, from what I understand, pretty skewed racially in general. I haven't seen the recent ones because I don't have those. But I just want to note that, like, I think they had some of the same issues in terms of data collection and access to information, and that that is an ongoing concern.
Any other questions or comments related to that study? All right. Well, that brings us to, I believe, the end of our agenda for today. And that works out nicely with our time. Okay, Diana clarified. So that study was based on 2013 to 2016 data. So that's helpful. Thank you for that context, Diana. We are, just to review our schedule, we have next Tuesday our public hearing from 6:30 to 8:30. I would like to plant a seed now that I would really appreciate someone volunteering to take the minutes for that meeting. It's very difficult for me to facilitate a public hearing and take the minutes as well. So think about that. Whoever is maybe willing to volunteer, I'll ask for a volunteer next meeting. So tonight, originally we were planning on hopefully having our students present some research that they had done. They asked for some more time. So I was hoping that that could happen on June 14th. And I think we're still hoping for that. I don't know, Justin, if you wanna.
Yeah, so one, I think I mentioned this to you. June 14th is my daughter's first birthday, so I will be out of commission that day in a joyous way, luckily. But I do, you know, and I do this work in partnership with young people, so I don't want to speak on their behalf. But you know, my concern is that, you know, they're just really tired. And like, it's been a very long 2 years for them, or 2 school years, and they are kind of really uber focused on like getting to the finish line, and trying to enjoy any semblance of like what high school was supposed to be, including things like prom, like things that I'm really glad are back. They deserve it. And so I just, I'm going to try to just kind of be present for them and be a support to them. And if they have the bandwidth to do this, I'm going to support them in this, but I'm just concerned that like putting, these two seniors who have given this community a ton, I think are just wiped out. And so I don't want to put more, I guess what I'm trying to also say is that I just don't want to put more stress on them as they like kind of take whatever energy they have to get to the finish line. So I'm going to just keep asking them questions and sending them text and letting them know I'm here to support them if they have the bandwidth to do this. I didn't hear back from them when I texted today. And so I want to just kind of, I don't know if it's like setting an out for them, but I just, to be fair, I think they're going through a lot and deservedly, like to their credit, they're getting there. But so I'll stop there.
So that's where we are with our June 14th meeting. So hold that space, but we're not sure if what that will look like, or if we will have that meeting. But please do plan on June 23rd as our final meeting to put together whatever recommendations we would like to make to the Board of Education. So yes, Mike, I was hoping we could do it afterward. Molly, I see your hand.
I was going to suggest if the students feel pretty tapped out to provide us additional information, could we reach out to either Connecticut Voices, OPM, or other people outside of Middletown who might be knowledgeable in this area to kind of present to us on a night before the last meeting?
How does the committee feel about that? I see a thumbs up from Diana. Sergeant Porter. Okay, I see general nodding. So I can look into that.
Maybe even other districts.
Okay. Okay. So definitely public hearing next Tuesday, and June 23rd will be our final meeting. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and your participation. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Second.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Have a